Yeah, that was almost late.
You are listening to the Spent the Rent podcast. And now, here's your host, Patty Rose.
I am Patty Rose, and welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. This is episode number 207, season 6. My guest today is a candidate for Eugene mayor. Is it Kaarin Knudsen? Oh my God. Kaarin. I was going to ask you off, and then I did, and you said it, and then I couldn't remember.
That's okay.
So it's Kaarin Knudsen. You're running for Eugene mayor. This is big. I'm really excited that you agreed to do this, especially since I've been kind of critical of the current situation with mayor. We'll talk about that in a bit, but let's talk about you as a Eugenian first. You spent a lot of time in this area. You've worked as an architect, an educator, and a leader with more than 20 years experience advancing sustainable design and community-led solutions. In 2017, the housing advocacy organization, you founded the housing advocacy organization Better Housing Together. Explain to us the work that you do at Better Housing Together and what that's all about.
Sure. And thank you for the invitation to be here today, because this is fantastic and I really appreciate it. And it's an exciting time because we're at the beginning, really still the early stages of this campaign. So to share a little bit about that background and my background, I'm an architect and I teach as a part of the non-tenured faculty at the university. I teach every fall a graduate first year workshop in sustainable urban design. So that just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago for this fall term and with that new cohort of graduate students. And then I've been engaged in work in our community as a community leader with organizations and volunteerism for several years. And the work of Better Housing Together as a housing advocacy organization, really, going back to like 2016, that organization emerged out of a growing sense that I had at that point that we had a housing crisis in our community. We weren't really seeing the features of that crisis in a way that were going to help us to address it. And we needed to do some work in community to organize ourselves and organize the different perspectives and advocacy efforts in community to do a better job of accomplishing policy innovation and making change. So, and I've told this story a couple of different friends. The work when I first started what became Better Housing Together, that was like so many community efforts started with, 50 coffee dates with people, right? And you're just sitting down, asking people, what they know about this circumstance, if they're aware, of this emerging data. At that point, I was well aware of a couple of data points that were really striking to people. One of them was that Eugene was the second most constrained housing market in the nation, second to Seattle. And this is 2016, 17. And that for people was shocking, just even to understand like where we were relative to Seattle and the rest of the country. And housing constraint is a term that relates to like how much housing is available that people can afford with what they're earning locally. So Spent the Rent, like aptly titled podcast. So that data I was familiar with, and I'm an architect, so I'm also watching the ways in which our local building culture is working and kind of where our attention was centered. And then I also was familiar with the United Way's ALICE report. And for folks who aren't familiar with that community work, the United Way produces this report. I think it's every 2 years, but ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. And basically what it is a report that looks at like, how's the community doing and how much of your community is either, engaged actively in the experience of poverty or just barely making it, each week or each month.
Right.
And
like house poor or whatever.
Well, house poor or not house poor in the sense that like they don't have stable housing, right? Yeah. And they're really just struggling, working full time, right? So, asset limited, meaning like they don't have a whole bunch of inherited wealth or like stocks and bonds and stuff. But they're also working full time, right? And their income is constrained. Like their occupational group, right, is never going to, be earning, like buckets and buckets of money, right?
Right.
So looking at that data, 7 years ago plus 8 years ago, that number showed that like 42%, it's now 44%, might even be higher of our community was within the ALICE threshold. And it doesn't take, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. Like if you've got half of your community struggling to make ends meet every month, and it's probably more, you're going to have a really hard time making progress as a community. You're going to have a really hard time, finding the energy and the resource or the courage to tackle policy innovation when really, you're just dealing with basics and making sure that people can, put food on the table, maintain their housing, take care of their kids and their family, right?
Yeah. It's good that you're looking at data, and we're going to talk about tech, I'm sure, throughout the, this hour, but it's good that you're looking at data because there's so many things that can be striking about all that stuff, and it can paint a picture. Working as an architect, do you find that there can be counterintuitive kind of ideology when it comes to advocacy for like the low income? And because I know that obviously it's a big business kind of thing, you're going to make the most with people with big pockets, kind of stuff.
Oh, thinking in the field of architecture.
I mean, and I know that when you get into any occupation, you can kind of choose how you want to have your ethical ground, as far as it goes. So I'm sure that there's certain things that you can probably make more money in certain areas, but you can make a nice little happy pocket for yourself by doing stuff where you're helping people.
Yeah.
And so how does that look as far as working as an architect and advocating for low income, households?
That's a great question. I love that you're asking it because it also speaks to some of the misunderstanding even about that professional field of architecture.
Yeah.
In that, I think there's more education and apprenticeship requirements of architecture than any other field.
Yeah.
And the return on that investment, given what you earn, as a worker within that industry, is not great. So your kind of point about the cachet or what's associated with the field of architecture, it's a ton of work and a ton of licensure process in order to be responsible, for buildings and the built environment, health, safety, and wellness of people, right? It's important that the people who are doing that work are licensed and
right.
And current in all those ways. But within the field of architecture, people pursue it for really different reasons. I came to the work of architecture out of having initiated a career in design and communications and the nonprofit and social service landscape. So when I came back to Oregon to get my master's degree in architecture, it was having worked for 5 years within the social service and nonprofit community within the San Francisco Bay Area, and realizing that because of where my values were relative to opportunity within community and sustainability and the sort of game board, right, that we set up for people in community through how we physically build our culture, right, and build our societies with infrastructure, with housing, with commercial space, right, all that stuff. That's the game board that we interface with. And there's only so much you can do through services if that game board is fundamentally not serving people, right?
Right.
So that was my motivation for pursuing my master's degree in architecture and deciding that I was going to move into that career in this path. And not surprisingly, the work that I've done as an architect has been, centered on projects that, sustainability and equity and community engagement and trying to think of new ways, to get at problems and bring people together around those solutions. That's been a lot of where my professional work has been focused. And this last 7 years, when I started Better Housing Together, I had started my own, small consulting business, hung a shingle. And I thought, this is great because as now the, proprietor partner in this entity, I can decide to take on a public interest project like building out an organization for housing advocacy like Better Housing Together.
Right.
So that was my, entry. And I work with a lot of, wonderful folks within the building culture who are, a lot of the reason why people become architects is because they want to help fulfill the needs that we have in our community, especially around housing.
So with Better Housing Together, and you talked on it, but I mean, layman's terms, what is the number one thing that you do?
Oh, sure. So Better Housing Together is a housing advocacy organization. And I would say what is unique about our work is that as a nonprofit organization and the hub of a collective impact effort in Lane County, we advocate for housing needs across the full continuum. And what that means is that we're looking really systemically at like, what do we have in terms of our housing supply and the provision of this resource to our community? What does our community actually need? And how do we bring those things closer together, right? So in some cases, that's going to mean some of the work that we've done around creating Eugene's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. In other cases, it's going to be work like helping, or authoring Lane County's first affordable housing action plan. And then in other cases, it's going to be working on like local policy innovation, like the work that we did to promote Eugene's pre-approved accessory dwelling unit catalog. Like that was something that came out of our work with our partners, and a lot of architects were like, we got to help people make this easier. Or things like working on, housing diversity locally, and the middle housing ordinance that we needed to curate locally to respond to state law a couple of years ago. All of that has to do with trying to steer the ship, right, of our housing supply, and knowing that within community, we need a bunch more affordable housing. We need permanent supportive housing. We need solutions for people transitioning out of homelessness. But we also need a bunch more housing that is accessible and affordable to just like everyday folks,
right?
And people in the community who are looking at the options available and like can't understand, how it is we got to this
costs
point.
have gone. I mean, it's exploded.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot to talk about, but at any time, if you want to come on and talk in depth about Better Housing Together, I would love that, because that's kind of what I do.
Sure.
I've talked to Shelter Care. We've had Gabe Pikovitz on Square One Lumber or Square One, whatever.
Square One Villages.
That's doing,
all partners in Better Housing Together's
exactly.
work, and a homelessness coalition that I've been working as a part of.
Chris McAllister, shout out to Chris McAllister, is another one. He's probably one of the biggest. Not that it's competition, but he's one of the biggest advocates for the houseless in the area for sure. So considering your journey from being an architect and an instructor at the University of Oregon, advocating for housing solutions in the city, what inspired your decision to run for the Eugene mayor?
Well, it's pretty obvious to everyone right now that addressing our housing and the crisis of homelessness in this community is like number one issue. Right. And it's the number one issue when, I've been knocking on doors and meeting people on their doorsteps for this last couple of months, every weekend, pretty much. It's on the top of everyone's minds, and it's on, and that is understandable, because the experience of especially unsheltered homelessness in our community is incredibly visible. And also there are a lot of folks, as we were just talking about, who are really struggling to feel like the opportunities that they want to believe that are accessible here are actually present. And a lot of that has to do with the high cost of housing and how much pressure that puts on people, in ways that is difficult to weather over time, right? If you don't feel like you're gaining ground, or your experience is stabilizing in some way. So like my decision to run for mayor is absolutely related to that experience, in coalition building and advocacy related to housing issues over this past, 7 years of work. But also that what I've learned through this process, and I've also heard from others, is that it's experience and ideas and ways of working that, of course, we need those new approaches and those new ideas, but also the way of working so that people do feel like they're connected to the solutions, like they are part of building and advancing that vision. Like that is critical, like to our community's future. We have to do a better job of working together. And I'm really proud of the work we've been able to do with Better Housing Together, in the sense that we have brought together pretty wide range of perspectives and, areas of expertise and, disciplines, industries, to agree on how we might move forward. And that matters so much, because if we can be moving as a community, right, then our perspective is changing.
Right.
If we're moving, if we're stuck and nothing is happening, we're not, shifting anything about the environment or the circumstances we find ourselves in, we're just frustrated and stuck. Like it always looks the same. But so that work of being able to connect with people, bring people together, hold space, really people to even like work through their frustrations and the sense that like they haven't been heard, and and then when they are involved, like they give feedback and it's important, but it somehow never feels like it really lands. Sure. Right. That is work that I have done a lot in our community, and like we're seeing progress.
Right. And that's a great answer, because essentially it's like, well, the work that I've put in and the elbows that I've been bumping, it starts to seem like I kind of belong, and so, I mean, there's a feeling. I know that you and I have both worked as precinct committee people for the Democratic Party of Lane County. And I have kind of backed off on the work that I've done, which I've talked about on the podcast. The Democratic Party is great in the way that they are like, come when you want, I know that it's tiring and you get fatigue. I'm also kind of trying to figure out where I've been falling on stuff, because I'm living in Springfield, and I got to be honest, I'm just seeing things differently. Not that, I mean, I'm number one issue is healthcare. It's so important to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm
hopefully
sure that
we'll talk more about, because that's another.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about the hospital for sure, and I mean, there'll be some in there, but that's cool. I mean, I'm glad you're running. I don't know, and this is a terrible thing for me to ask you. I should have done the research myself, but do you have an opponent yet? I don't think.
I think there are at least two other people who have filed, the initial steps to run, and I know I've been saying for a couple of months that I expect there to be, several names on the ballot in May, and still, like, my goal is to connect with as many people as possible and to reach as many people as possible in this next several months and in the work that we have been doing. And I would love for May of 2024 to feel like a really solid step for our community.
We'll see what happens. And I'm glad I have your ear here now, because if you get, we'll just say a really good contender, right? I would love to have a forum, some sort, because I don't think that we get that a lot, where it's not done by corporate, so that they're buttoned up, and it's not the people that host it locally, they do great, but they can only say what they can say. They can't, they don't, and time constraints and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll visit that as the time comes. The reason that I wanted to have you on now was because, like you just said, the primaries in May, and in Eugene, and this is my words, but in a stronghold, where there's a party that's going to dominate the populist, the population. May, in an open primary, the election could be done. If you get 51% in May, it's over. So this isn't something that happens in November. This is something that happens in March, April, May, this election. So there's going to be a lot happening. Plus, this is going to be my last episode of the year. So I wanted to have you on so that people had a lot of chance to get, have this one get eyeballs. You've gained support from some of the influential figures in Eugene, like current Mayor Lucy Venice and former Mayor Kitty Piercy. This is a tough question. I wasn't really sure how to word. How do you plan to leverage the backing of those supporters, but also convince voters that you're about bringing real change?
Yeah. I think it's a great question, and it's been framed to me in different ways in community. I will say that, like, as a first obvious statement, I am really grateful to have support from everyone who has endorsed this campaign. And we're headed towards 200 folks who are on that list who have already endorsed me and my mayoral candidacy. And that fills me with a great sense of pride and responsibility. And it's an incredible, I'm grateful, and it's a fortune for me that our current mayor, who knows the job, and a former mayor who knows the job, have endorsed me in this role, and that those are strong women and strong progressive leaders in our community. I also am really fortunate is that when I look at that cross-section of folks and I think about the people other than Mayor Venice who have been asking me to run for office, that is a really grounding experience for me, because it helps me to understand the responsibility that people believe in me carrying for our community. So I'm really fortunate to have support from our current mayor and people who know this responsibility well. And I've, joked with folks, there's only a handful of people alive who know the role and responsibility of being Eugene's mayor. And it's a particular, set of responsibilities, and there is no other job like it. Right. But what fills me with just like encouragement and reinforcement is the sense that there's a lot of different perspectives and people who are excited about this campaign. And it's entirely because they are ready for new energy and new approaches. And, I see circumstances differently from Lucy. In some cases, we have shared values,
sure.
but like are going to take different approaches. And I think that that's exciting because there's momentum that we can capture, but there's also like this new chapter that we're embarking on. And, it's different to have, someone mid-career and a parent of kids in our public schools running for mayor. We haven't seen that before. I don't know if we've seen, that kind of demographic ever, but that also feels to me like it's in keeping with, the change in our community.
I think there's a lot of areas that you can bridge stuff. I'm not going to say your age because I know better, but I think we're in the same decade. And so that's cool because that's the first for me. I'm also getting older, but it's good to see because I know that with the work you've done that you're bumping elbows with people across political views, age, all that good stuff. I even on the younger end of it, I can't remember his name right now, nor would I probably drop it on the podcast. But I cut one of your students or one of the students that interviewed you for your position at the university.
Oh, interesting.
And I wish I could remember his name, but either way, I interviewed him and he told me a little bit about you because I was like, hey, I was all excited. I'm doing a podcast with a woman running for mayor. And he told me about how, the interview process was and stuff in housing. And he was a big fan. So that was cool.
Oh, that's sweet.
One thing I want to ask is, were you guarantee the voters a peaceful transfer of power if you do get elected to mayor? I just want to make sure
what's happening in our world. What is happening?
That's not a question that should have to be asked.
It shouldn't have to be asked. You can count on peaceful transfer of power and no misinformation.
Sure.
I mean, you're joking, but also I will say that this is another reason why I'm working so hard right now to reach out to so many folks and connect them with this campaign, because I do want for us to win this campaign in May. I think it could be like a great step forward and a step together for our community in May. And my approach, because I'm, not, coming to this out of a political establishment perspective, is that I want like fantastic turnout for that election. And I want a lot of people to feel like in the primary and a lot of them to feel connected to this work.
They've already legalized marijuana. I don't know what else they can do to get people to show up. No.
But I think that, in the grand scheme of 2024, it's going to be a rough time.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
It's going to be
there's a lot of voter fatigue on both sides. And I think that in the primary, you're going to see a lot of protest votes from the left. I think people need to really understand that, it's going to be tough. I can't even focus on the national stuff because there's some great stuff happening locally and great people that are accessible. Obviously I was calling, the Lane County Commissioners Board. I was talking about my hair being on fire when some of the changes happened, and it hasn't happened yet. So, we're represented by some good people, I think.
And locally, this is like, and this is a call to everyone who's listening today or who hears this in the future. Like being involved locally, I think is the best.
It's huge
salve to that larger, challenge that we're facing in this country. We have to be connected to one another. We have to know each other. We're a community that's of a size where it's still possible to really feel like or almost know, just lots and lots and lots of different people and perspectives. And that like that 2024 election cycle, like nationally, we know it's going to be rough, but locally, I am so hopeful that we can feel like it's a coming together moment. And I'm really working on that. So anyone also who's listening, if you work with a community organization or gather with people in community or thinking about like ways that you wish you could be more connected to our city, to someone who's running for mayor, like definitely reach out to my campaign. KaarinForMayor.com is my campaign web address. But I would love to connect and have those conversations. That's how democracy actually happens.
Yeah. And that's how I've really made this podcast happen, is I just kind of cold call people, reach out to them through different mediums and say, hey, like I do the show. Would you like to come on and talk? And usually the answer is yes, because people are like, sure, I've been working really hard on this. I want to talk about it. So, considering your transition from architecture to potential political leadership, how do you perceive your limited traditional political experience shaping your ability to lead and make decisions as a mayor? I know that really I want to add to that too. It's just what leadership is to you. I mean, to me, delegation's huge. Surrounding yourself with people that are really smarter, I don't know about smarter, but just making sure that you're, challenged by the people around you. But yeah, what does leadership look like to you? And we kind of already talked about how this prepares you and how architecture prepares you, but how do you see the transition being? I mean, are you still you'll still be working?
Well, yes, though I have to make some shifts to my life and professional work, because the role of the mayor is a full-time, and you never quite know what's going to be expected. So that question about how I think about leadership, and also how I think about this opportunity of connecting experience from architecture to the role of being the mayor of Eugene. One thing to just have in mind, and I've said something about this when I first launched my campaign in September, that most people think about architects as in a pretty, I don't know, it's a pretty old fashioned sense of oh, that's the, the old white guy who goes off into a tower and designs a building and brings it down, and then there's a building built, and
just blueprints and that's it.
And visions, right?
Throwing stuff off the desk and then spreading something out.
That's and Ayn Rand, kind of stuff. And I pursued architecture from the perspective of understanding that to be the holistic builder within community, and thinking of the Greek basis of the word architect, that's really about the fullness of building. And when I came to my profession, it was with an understanding that the built culture is one piece of our community and our culture. And to be really a builder in that larger sense, it's really about your ability to build community, because the building culture is always trailing, right? It's never, buildings take so long to create, right? Things take so long to build. They're never at the absolute forefront, right? Of
that's
community.
Why South Dakota has empty subways, because they had for fracking. It was a thing, and then it moved on.
Yeah. And so we, as within my professional career, that's definitely a connection point, in that it's really about that larger sense of what you're building, social capital, bringing, a vision into focus, and then moving towards that vision, right? Realizing, and architects do this all the time. You have a deadline for a project. It needs to be done. You've got 2 years of time. You have, a set of goals or ideas, and they're sort of cloudy and fuzzy, and it becomes, a clear vision for that work. And then you break that work down into the steps that you need. You bring that team together, right, around you, that you're going to need to challenge the work, to make it better, to, complete all of the tasks, right, and fill all the areas of expertise that are needed. And then you develop those ideas, right? And you test them, and you continue to run into conflicts, and then resolve those conflicts, right? Most of the work of architecture is resolving conflict.
Yeah.
And not just interpersonal conflict, though sometimes, that's usually in the, construction process, but on the way to even building something, right? We want this to be this way, but we also want it to be this way, and it can't be both ways. What do? You have to actually find the path. So that's architecture to me. And that's the work of the architect. And then when I think about, this bigger picture and transitioning into the mayoral role, and, making decisions, and it being an advantage to come to this from outside of a political, background, I just see that as a great opportunity for our community, because the work I've been doing has been about seeing things different with the goal of actually accomplishing change. And I think that, the mayoral role and the structure of the job of the mayor is unique in Eugene. It's, it doesn't have veto power. The mayor only votes in tiebreakers, right? And the role of the mayor really is about connecting people to that vision, building those bridges, right? And then guiding conversations.
Absolutely.
And it's a bully pulpit, but it's also leading from the side. It's, in a lot of cases, it might be an overt expression of capacity, but it's also a soft power in relationship to a lot of things.
And a lot of people don't understand how this stuff works. And this is why it's so important for people
especially not now, right? Because we've got these strong man, rule by fiat people.
Duterte. Oh my gosh.
There's so much right now that is miscalibrating people to the work of community and democracy. And that piece, I mean, you also asked about leadership, and this is I think also really important. A lot of people, I think, because we've seen certain people in power intentionally advance this misunderstanding, conflate the terms leadership and authority. And in reality,
yes,
authority is all the systems that we've set up that say, like, this is how it's going to run, like this is how it's going to work, right?
Just accountability is what it should be.
Yeah, and that an authority, like, there are all sorts of authorities that are not, authoritarian. They're things like, the building codes or
sure.
the regulations, right? Like laws and structure. But leadership is always outside of that, right? Leadership means like, okay, we know that these things we have the authority to do, and we've agreed that we're going to do them, or we have the structures in place that perpetuate this. Leadership is like a step outside of that, where you're asking questions like, is this working?
Yeah.
How could we do this
how
better?
Can I, how can I enable, how can I enable my staff, or whatever?
Yeah. And how can we do things differently as a community to get ourselves closer to the visions we have for our community? Right. So leading is, much riskier, right? Requires more courage, more calm, right? And fortitude for public conversation, and engagement, at this particular point in time. But it's like, that's how things move, is because you're not just centered on authority.
Right.
And
that's a good segue. Talking about staying calm. We talked about your supporters. This is going to be tough, and I want to kind of set this up. And this is just tough because the political landscape now is so us versus them, and we need to do things to kind of squash that. And so I'm sure on the campaign trail, that's what you're trying to do. We've talked about your supporters. Let's talk about your detractors. Our city council, and not you specifically, but just you're going to step into a position where there's going to be criticism hurled at you as if you're repeating what's being, this direction we've been going for 30 years. So and let me paint a picture for where Eugene's at. And this is my take. Our city council and school board meetings are always joined with unhappy residents. 2022, there was a poll that showed 60% of Eugene residents feel livability is going in the wrong direction. We have recalls of elected officials, some very disgruntled voters, albeit they're outnumbered by your supporters, but they do matter. And what do you tell those that may disagree with your vision for the city?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is that, like, I do think that this election and this campaign is not just about the people who I already know support me. And I've even been in conversation with some folks saying, like, hey, just looking at the numbers, like, you wouldn't think that I would necessarily be reaching out to you right now, but I am, because it matters that we set, ourselves on a trajectory of collaboration. And I've been really clear with folks that I'm trying to run a campaign that looks like how I would serve. So working on understanding, like, these different perspectives and frustrations that people have, disappointments people have, right? Like there's a lot of, just right now with all of the issues that, people are finding to be difficult day to day in community life, and then heartbreaking, right? And just like the news cycle right now. And there's so much that is just hurting people, right? And for most people, like, when they're hurting, it comes out as mad, right? It comes out as anger, mostly. Like, not always, but oftentimes. And that, like, that connection, to our public service, like, we're not making it easy for people to step up for service. So that is something that we need to be thinking about long-term in our community, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not making it easy.
Because you're going to get threats.
Yeah. And that's, like, these are reasonable things that people are now worrying about. But I also feel like we can do a better job of finding venues that are actually purposeful,
and constructive,
right? And constructive for those kinds of conversations. And, some of the things that I'm working on, and we'll talk more about in the coming months, is, just thinking about, like, how can we actually create the spaces that we need to do the work we have to do as a community. I don't think that, public comment at the dais is the most effective way for people to feel engaged with policy work.
Right.
There's a lot of other ways for people to plug in, but, like, if they're going to do that, it has to feel as though their time is being well spent.
Sadly, I found that voters have very little attention span for policy, and for policy, because I'm a policy wonk for a lot of the stuff. The only time that people care is their wallet and their car. Like, they don't want roundabouts in Springfield. That's all I know. They're like that's all. But
let's solve all the problems, but no taxes.
Do
like, all the things.
Where books are free at the library, where you can learn that we shouldn't have taxes. I remember seeing that on the Daily Show. He was talking about.
I never never ignore the reality before you, right? And especially when if you're thinking about community and you're thinking about resilience, like, you got to turn and face the difficult reality. And one of the difficult realities we have in our community is that a lot of people are having a hard time, like, putting together a life that, and it feels like, the Southern Willamette Valley, Eugene, Springfield has been a place that, people have seen, like, there might be the potential there, like there might be the potential here, right? To, people moving here and wanting to start a life and having a vision for their family, or people who grew up here and are like, yeah, I've got everything I need. And we have to work on some of these, like, structural challenges that we face. I mean, I care about, every issue facing our city. The reason why abundant housing and, healthy economy and safe public spaces are three, platform issues that I'll be talking a lot about, is they are three things that we need to work on right now in our community to actually help our community. And they're interrelated, and they benefit all of us, right? When we do a better job of dealing with those three things and seeing them as interrelated. So I think, like, there is very little patience with policy work. Unfortunately, we're also, in a broth, like, living in a milieu that, can, like, get people pretty fired up pretty easily, right? Like, social media doesn't help us with democracy in most cases.
No.
Right? It's like, that algorithm is not designed for the kind of complexity that, that real work in community requires. But
maybe
it's good for sharing news.
Yeah,
with
maybe
people.
not. But I think that what's happened is that people are able to amplify what matters to them, and then sometimes they're getting told what matters to them, and that's a different argument. But I think the big thing we need to do is listen to each other. You can't fact check nonstop when somebody's talking to you and they just don't live in reality. But and that goes for both sides, because I'm sure that both sides feel that way, and we need to acknowledge that too. That's where our empathy lies, that we both think that the other side is nonsense. Sometimes those are my words.
That's definitely a spot that we're getting stuck. And
I had to diffuse one of my customers, who, I'm a barber, and he is an amazing guy. Well, he's kind of a grumpy asshole, but he's cool, and we have a good rapport, because it means a lot to me to get to have this rapport with him. He's an older guy. He's like 70s and super conservative, and obviously watches Fox all day. And he tells me, can you believe these liberals that are pushing that? I'm not going to get into the Israel stuff too much, but the from the river to the sea chants and stuff. And I'm like, first of all, did you know about that a week ago? Like, did you know about? So you're outraged, about this. I'm just saying, the average American doesn't know about that kind of stuff. They don't follow that. And so Fox is telling them to be mad about it. And I'm like, but before we do that, like, I'm already finding myself fact checking, and I'm like, are you really going to talk about anti-Semitism coming from the left? I mean, yes, it does exist, but everybody in power, Biden down, is condemning those comments with unequivocally, and there's a couple people that have been censured, like Rashida Tlaib and stuff like that, which, as far as I'm concerned, it's a huge umbrella for the Democrats. Rashida Tlaib is going to use her voice, and you're going to listen to it because her perspective actually matters, and we need to include it. But there's also problems with it, and we're going to call that out as well. Now, the right they had a hard time calling out Charlottesville. We could see here poke things. And I said this to Bill, and it actually was effective, because I said, what about this, Bill? I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that you don't really, what my point is that apples and oranges, if you really want to play that, you keep acting like this side's so terrible. We got to stop with that.
And I think,
because I'm like, what is it?
We're getting played.
Because I'm like, what is it? Because he lives out. He lives out, out up the McKenzie, and he's an awesome dude, and I hope he listens to this. Shout out to be out there. But what we were talking about was we like each other, and you have to understand that like most of those wacky ideas I actually have. So as much as we always want to play it like, oh no, I'm not one of those guys that agrees with it. I may not agree with what some of the Democratic policies are, but the things that I agree with is that there's perspectives that need to be heard that I have no concept of understanding them.
It's pretty.
Does that make, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to be about, because that's the whole point of freedom.
And I do think like it's pretty powerful to be able to hear someone say something that you might immediately know that doesn't align. I don't think that aligns with my values. I feel like we're about, heading into discord, but to, instead of falling into that trap, just like ask a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Right. Like, tell me more about what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what you're really concerned about.
It gets tough when they're mad about the Little Mermaid, being African-American or whatever, and that kind of those silly things. I mean, I made a post about Taylor Swift, and people have to understand my humor. I grew up listening to punk rock music. And I was told that I was being a chauvinist. And, the thing that Time Magazine said that Taylor Swift gave 10,000 people their voices. And I'm like, how does she give them their voice? And then, I got checked and was like, if you're oblivious to it, then it shows your not chauvinism, misogyny. And I was like, what? And then I kind of looked into it a little bit, and she makes some good points. I don't fully agree, nor do I apologize, because I'm not going to, I'm not trying to be one of those guys, but at a certain point you have to be able to be yourself, and so it's tough.
And like, it does feel like, and that, and I'm thinking of that because that's a post through social media. Like there's a lot of times where it does feel like we have gotten lulled into a pattern of looking for the argument, rather than looking for a point of agreement.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, I think in a different time, like, you could make a funny post about something and be like, why would this person be the person of the year? And, no one would think about it. But there's all these other inputs, right, that people have. And, and it just so happens that like she is a person who, it seems everyone in the universe knows what she's doing every day.
And it resonated a lot with me, because I do care about women in leadership. And so it also can be true that I can be what I consider to be a feminist, because that to me, the definition of feminism is fighting for equity, equality,
women are held equal.
I think that, men can believe that everybody should be treated equally. It's pretty simple, you know.
And every year, I mean, something like the Time Person of the Year, right? Like
it gets always silly things.
And it's always going to generate a question of like, why this person or why not that person?
And it mattered who was saying it to me. I'll be the first to admit, because when she called me out, I'm like, well, look, you matter. Your voice is huge and holds a lot of weight with me. And so I will eat crow or just put my tail between my legs. And because I want to show that ultimately it's not a big deal for me, that her opinion matters more to me than my opinion on Time Magazine.
Yeah.
So,
I would also say, because that makes me think, like, I would be really interested, in that same string conversation to ask, like, so who do you guys think should be the person of the year?
Yeah, it was great. That thread was great. Yeah, so I'm glad that I posted something stupid and snarky, because I'm willing to get that stuff thrown at my face. And the reality is that ultimately what it was that I was like, what the hell is the deal with Taylor Swift? And then everybody was like, I'm going to tell you, so anyway,
where have you been?
Yeah, what is the deal? I don't know. I mean, I just don't understand now. Maybe it's because of COVID. I mean, that after things came back out, why the explosion? Because this tour was like, I haven't been able to go outside. I haven't been able to see people. Now I want bracelets all the way up my arm.
Yeah.
I don't know. So
I will say, because there's lots of probably different ways we could take this, but I'll just mention something as a parent. And I'm thinking back also to like, who were the pop stars and the people who got that kind of attention, and why did they get that attention when I was a kid? And
Marilyn Manson.
Well,
just joking. I don't know.
But like Taylor Swift getting all of this attention because like she's, reclaiming her albums. She's like not a one woman. She's the person, leading this like thousands of people endeavor with this tour, but she's like an economic engine.
Oh my God.
And then like I'll just say, like, as a parent, like the songs that she writes and the lyrics that I hear my kids singing, I'm like, that's pretty rad that's what you're singing.
It's wholesome.
And it's not this like pining thing of like, where is the person who will always make me perfect, or make me whole.
Or having to be, of looks alone, because I mean, that's a lot of what you see in women reclaiming their sexiness, which is great, but that's arbitrary because what people view as being attractive is going to be different. And also, you shouldn't have to do that. I always say that for men, it's like, just because every man knows, and this is going to say something that's bro code, but like, just because every man knows, you got to be considerate to people. You got to treat women with respect. You got to treat everyone with respect, right? Mm-hmm. Open doors, that kind of stuff. That stuff is still alive for a lot of people, whether people like to admit it or not. Mm-hmm. Chivalry still exists in men's minds. So there's this balance of like, you got to be tender and generous and empathetic. And you also need to not be a little bitch. And so like every guy tells themselves that. And I'm the first person to say this, where it comes across as harsh, but this is what perspectives are about. We're having these conversations because when you're reaching out to these conservative dudes, they're literally telling themselves, if I concede, even by giving her respect, I'm being a little bitch, is what they tell themselves in their mind, whether we want to admit it or not. In a lot of cases is what I'm saying. So there's this battle that goes on, and it's toxic masculinity, right?
Yeah.
So this is the hard part. And this is too long of a podcast, but this is for this conversation, but this is the hard part. Men aren't going to listen to women on changing that. And so that's why I'm brainstorming. I'm thinking about it because that's my goal, is that I want to be one of the people having that conversation where we can talk about solutions. And I think that one of the most inspiring things in my life was a Reader's Digest article. What's the problem with the world? All these people wrote these long essays. The person that wrote the winning essay said, I am. And so that's, if we can look at it like that, then we can worry about not only our social groups, but just our individual self first. And then we can expand to the social group and influence them.
Yeah.
We should do it that way. Instead of changing other people, we should just change ourselves.
And it's harder to answer a question of like, what would you do?
Yeah.
Right. And who would you choose than it is to say that person shouldn't.
Yeah. I know I just went on a tangent, but we have a couple more topics I want to talk about before we get out of here. The first of all, so which one do you want to talk about first? I know that this is interesting because we've gone this entire interview without mentioning that you were a student athlete at the University of Oregon. And I know that that's really cool for a lot of people. I was talking to the dude at Dutch Bros today, talking about my podcast because I was trying to plug it. And I was like, hey, she ran track. She's running for mayor. She ran track at the U of O. He's like, oh, sick, bro. So let's talk about that. Yeah. Well, drawing from your experience as a runner, because you run outside on the streets of Eugene. So you've seen alleys, corners, the depths of what Eugene's all about. Yeah. And explain, how on your runs, how you've kind of had this vision of like, oh my gosh, I want to make change here.
Yeah. So I will say I'm really fortunate in that I fell in love with running as a kid, and it was a great way to explore the world. And then, I was fortunate to have some connections with some, gym teachers in elementary school and coaches in middle school to high school who were mentors to me and are lifelong friends now. And who helped me to like realize, a lot of the potential that I had as an athlete. So I was a middle distance runner in college at U of O. I was an All-American in the 800 meters and the mile. So that's like 2 laps around the track and 4 laps around the track. And then I ran on our cross country team and we won the Pac-10 championships in 95. When you are a runner in this community, like, just like when you go for a jog, when you're visiting, a place that you don't know, right? A new city or a new community, a new town, like you see a lot just by virtue of the fact that you can cover, a mile in 7 or 8 minutes if you're out on a jog, and you
20 if you're me,
or 20 minutes or whatever. Sure. But like you're gonna see more, right? Than if you are, and you are gonna have longer, like bigger loops, right?
And shortcuts, and you know
shortcuts and connections, and where connections don't exist. And running in Eugene, like there are obviously like parts of, Tracktown community that are absolutely extraordinary, that are amazing. And, I experienced as a, young athlete in college, the magic of Hayward Field and the community here that just really like lifts up, people who are giving, their best in that way. And I've explored our community, like all of our, trails and all sorts of different streets and bike paths and not bike paths. Right. And, there's a huge disparity within our community when you look at the infrastructure that we provide for people to be able to access something as simple as going for a jog, right? Something as simple as going for a walk with friends or having a group that gets together and, does that a couple of times a week. These are like basic, opportunities to access health, right? For all of us, mental health, physical health, right? And in our community, we have some areas where we've got a lot of infrastructure and trails and safe streets and sidewalks and, intersections with signals and marked crossings. And then we've got a lot of other parts of our community. Like I say this every time that I'm, up out in, West Eugene, Northwest Eugene. Like if you're on the Fern Ridge path, there's one circumstance, with running that's that can present some challenges. If you're out in Northwest Eugene, it's like the street infrastructure doesn't support moving through the community by any means other than a car. And, we talk a lot about our transportation planning and transit planning, and that's, of course, super important. And I've been involved in a bunch of work on that front, obviously working in sustainable urban design, like equitable transportation systems and active transportation, super important. But at like a really fundamental level, people need to know that they can walk around in their neighborhood and safely cross the street.
Yeah.
And feel like
this is going to take a lot of education this is where politicians are going to have to figure out a medium because
we need.
Because the issue in the recalls was based on transportation, and was based on where they want to put an MX because the data is showing that it's like we need to make sure it's not just about getting people out there, that it's not just about the disabled people that are on the bus. I mean, that's a great thing that there's that, but it's about we're not going to be able to fit as many cars. And it's just the direction we're heading with just population growth and the fact that Eugene is surrounded by wetlands. There's not going to be room. And so when they have these proposals, then unfortunately, what do you do when you're like, this is what needs to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And in a republic democracy, when I was a duly elected person, I'm going to make the decision that I think is right for the community, whether, that's the tough thing.
I mean, I would say that one way to think about that is that there's a lot of different ways into this challenge, right? And some of them are, long range, infrastructure planning processes and community engagement processes. I just wrapped up last week some work on an ad hoc committee that LTD, Lane Transit District, had assembled this last several months. There was a group of 20 community members who were asked to basically help LTD think about what it looks like to do community involvement and community engagement differently in service of better outcomes for our community, for people to both feel better about the processes that we're going through, right? And also to be literally a part of creating those outcomes. And how can a transit agency do that? Jameson Otten, who's the new CEO at LTD, the general manager, he's great. And the fact that he is asking these questions about how can we do this better? What does it mean to rethink the way that our transit district,
which it's already one of the best in the world, in the country. Sorry.
They were, a couple of years, not that many years ago, within the last decade, LTD, was the best transit agency for a city of our size or something in the country, which is not a small accomplishment.
No, it's huge. And
it's huge.
Yeah. And I've been to Europe. I mean, going to England, it's insane how awesome the subway services and stuff are there, and how, but we have one more question. There's so much to talk about in 1 hour, but we have to talk about the hospital and what's, what this looks like. In my notes, the first 4 words, this is not good. That's literally all it says.
Yeah.
I live in Springfield, so I'm kind of torn. I work right on campus, right next to the hospital. A lot of my customers, long-term customers, are hospital employees. And so this really hits home, even though I live in Springfield. And so now we have both of the hospitals. We should charge a sales tax for people that come over from Eugene to use I'm going to talk to Sean Van Gordon about that one and see.
Goodness.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. No, but it's really bad. And I have to say that this is good that you're coming in with a fresh slate, not from the political world, because there's going to be a lot of fingers to point, and obviously it's a business. It's Peace Health. They're a private business and a private entity. And the facts of the matter is they're losing $24 million no, I think that they said they were losing like $3 million a month, something like that. And so it's just, it can't sustain, and there's a lot of rumors and a lot of wrong information going about, because the ER was already handcuffed and limited in what they could give. Yeah. They couldn't give any surgeries. They couldn't do all this different stuff. So that's already was in the process of, they would move you over anyway. So now you're going to be going to the right place is essentially is what's going to happen. And so I think Springfield and Eugene, it's funny because there is a line, but you're going to be working with Sean Van Gordon. If you win this seat, you're going to be working with Sean Van Gordon, and he's amazing. And, he's going to have an open line of communication. I know Eugene Fire Department, Eugene Springfield Fire has combined. I've talked to Randy Groves about how that is working. So this isn't as big of a deal as it sounds, but to have a town with 178,000 people or whatever, roughly, and no hospital is wild. So, I mean, how do you see Eugene adjusting to a reliance on Springfield for the majority of vital emergency services?
Yeah. So a handful of thoughts about that. I mean, one is, of course, like this, it's going to be a real time of adjustment. And I believe that the University District, the behavioral health unit is still going to be open, basically at that location, which is helpful. But I think that, for Eugene Springfield, in some ways, this question reminds me a little bit of a question that you asked earlier about how the public is feeling, about the work and how livability is in our community. And that, that those polling numbers, that information, it's probably Eugene, probably very similar to aspects of Oregon, probably very similar to aspects of polling around the US, right? And similarly, like the pressures and the dysfunctions and the need for innovation within our healthcare system, like that also is true locally. And the consolidation of medical care, like that is a trend that's been happening, nationwide in terms of, hospital closures and people and whole communities losing access. So as a framing, like I would say, okay, so, Peace Health Riverbend, like that's the hospital for our, 250,000, 300,000, 400,000 person, county area, community, right?
Yeah.
And so like not thinking, of Eugene not having access to a hospital, but like understanding that the absence of proximity to that resource and the exposure that that South Eugene has to a circumstance where there wouldn't be access to a major medical services is significant, right? So that shift is going to require new thinking,
flying cars,
or bridges that build themselves, right? I think that there's
it's going to require Springfield putting those little cameras that take a picture and it's like, you give me $1 every time the people in Eugene drive in. I'm just kidding.
I mean,
and then, because I mean, I was reading something one time about In-N-Out Burger. There's some talk about it going in Springfield. There's some other chicken places talk. I don't know. But oh my gosh, people are so funny on Facebook because they were like, if the mayor does this, and I'm like, that's not the mayor. Like they don't do that. No, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the building on campus. I know that.
I mean, I think there's
pros and cons. There's good things.
There's a future, right?
Yeah.
There are going to be decisions that continue to happen on that front. One of the things that's in the forefront of my mind is thinking about the populations in our community, right? The people who were routinely accessing that hospital.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned in this past couple of weeks in that conversation and talking to some community leaders about this is that because of the proximity, of course, to the University of Oregon, there have been significant percentage of services related to sexual assault and sexual violence that were provided by that touch point and that medical center. And so specifically thinking about, that absence of care and resource that's no longer, in close proximity to the university, that's major, need to think about, how it is that our community, how the university is planning to address that. And I can't imagine they're not thinking about it, because that's their community of students also that are now exposed to a risk and a lack of care that has previously been available. And then, figuring out how it is that, in Eugene, Springfield, and in Oregon, we work intensively on new strategies, new resources for behavioral health needs, because we're not meeting the need, and we don't have the capacity that we need within the system to support people. And as a result of that even when we get people temporarily stabilized, they fall back through the system. And that is going to continue to not be, in the trajectory that the healthcare system is going to continue to be a population of people that are not cared for, because it's expensive.
And it's tough because, I've heard people, and these were their words, but I've heard hospital employees tell me stuff like, and they care about their patients. There's no, so they're being frustrated by saying this, that they're like, well, they don't have, the city's not going to have the hospital now to babysit the homeless community, and saying stuff like that, where it's like, we're not going to be able to just basically just, pawn it off on them, because at a certain point, there's nothing that they can help, and I mean, it's just really, it's scary. And I don't know. I hope that this isn't catastrophic. Now, I've talked to people that maybe they're, optimistic people, but they told me that with the urgent care moving from West 11th, the only downside of that is you're losing a lot of parking, right? But with the hospital moving, there should be some parking and whatever. We'll deal with that. But with that moving from West 11th to campus, now what's going to be there, it's not in where the emergency room was, but it's across the street. They're going to be offering what essentially the emergency room was kind of doing in the first place, was basically up to the point of emergency services, more or less. So if you're having like a panic, if you're having mental health stuff, you can go in and you can talk to someone or whatever. They can get you pointed in the right direction. Or if you cut your finger or something like that, you can, but if you need a surgery, then you're going to have to go to, it was already happened, like I said. So they're saying that it's like the gap, it's not as big of a drop off as people think, but it's still really, I mean, I'm like, why not both? Why not both West 11th? And why did you close one? But that's just Peace Health making this is why healthcare shouldn't be a business, why it should be, but that's a whole different argument we should have for a different time. And it's probably never going to happen in our lifetimes, but we'll see.
I don't know. I mean, I think that I am definitely in that category of people who are eternally hopeful and are going to be, wanting us to keep working towards solutions, right? And better outcomes. So it might be that it looks different than how we're imagining it right now, but we are talking about all sorts of issues in our community where the absence of reliable housing and the absence of healthcare is, destabilizing to the point that, we have to come up with some new solutions. And Eugene's not unique in that. Oregon's not unique in that. No. The United States as a whole is going to be grappling with this.
It's pretty simple. I mean, I think it's pretty simple, and it's that there's a value added tax on your second billion, and it's 99% corporate taxes. I mean, it's pretty simple. No, but anyway,
and you're thinking that these are solvable problems.
Yeah, I'm kidding. It's not. It's absolutely not. And I'm, like I said before, I'm at a loss on where I even fall sometimes, because sometimes I'm like, maybe we need less government. And sometimes I start to believe the narrative that government is the problem, and so where we need less, there's always going to be some on a local level, and, it's very important, but I also feel like it's pretty broken. So it's tough. I mean, obviously, what are we going to do without it? It's like,
and we need to do a better job. A couple of things that I'll just add to that. One is that we clearly are suffering from the changes in our local channels for communication, right? It's really apparent in this last couple of years that with the decline of, a beat reporting daily newspaper, family owned, for a couple of generations in Eugene, that with the shift in the Register Guard locally, there's a lot more that's happening in our community that people feel disconnected from.
Sure.
And also as we're thinking about everything that is needed in the future, right? All of these,
I don't think they're doing, not to cut you off, but I don't think they're doing less. This is the thing. I actually think that there's more access to more information. So I think that the news, I know that the Register Guard's not what it once was.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about that. And it's not a local paper anymore and all that kind of stuff. But that being said, I think that the local news, the local journalists on like the TV networks and stuff, I think they do great. I honestly do. I think they do. Where do you think I get a lot of my stuff for the podcast? I mean, I'll be the first to admit it. I think the Eugene Weekly does a great job. I think the Emerald does a great job. And they have different views than each other, which is great. That's what journalism's for. We're supposed to have, I want to know where there's a conservative Eugene paper. It doesn't exist. Maybe it does. It's probably Nazi flyers that are being thrown on on the porches in Thurston, but that's a whole different thing. No, but I mean, I'm just saying, I encourage, a broad swath of journalism. I think it still exists like what we were used to. But now you add on top of it where you have these independent journalists like myself, and you have these people like the Thurston Neighborhood News, where they have a take on how things look, you know, and it's different. But like, it is the gap. There's a lot of people that aren't getting heard. And then,
And also that, like, when you're thinking about the work of local governance, like there's a lot of reporting of the day-to-day work of the city that now there's no visibility to it at all.
Yeah.
And so the question of like, what are we getting for all of this effort? What are we getting for all of this energy? Like there's definitely, a lot that's being missed there. And I think that that's one piece. The other is that, when you're thinking about governance, when you're thinking about how a community administers itself, the work it gets done, right? That should be responsive to the community's needs. And then, the work is really in helping people understand, kind of what we were joking about earlier, like, here's why, if we want to accomplish all of these new goals, we will need, resources to do that. We can't do that without resources, right? That is a little bit of a place that we've been caught, right? In terms of, people feeling like life has gotten hard. People are under a lot of pressure. And there's this sense, that's emerging that people feel like, our local endeavors aren't helping enough, right? Aren't doing enough to help people. And, that's always going to be the point of focus. I mean, and in my mind, that's the reason to do something like, step up and run for mayor. But it's also, I'm sure, the reason why a lot of people, who work within local government go to work every day. Like, they are wanting to help. But we've also got to be open to doing things differently.
Sure.
And if we see that we're spending a bunch of time and resource and not making progress, like, we should at least assess, what it would mean to change.
The thing that makes me excited about your campaign is that you are excited about 200 people. Is that you said 200 people are, supporters or whatever, and that number is small, and that's what local politics is all about. It's such a small amount of people, and so you can make a difference and get involved in both your, the parties or not. I want people to understand that you don't have to be of the belief system of every single issue to go and bump elbows with these people. If you wanted to go to the DPLC chili cook-off as a conservative, as long as you come with a good heart, you're welcome. You know what I'm saying? That's the whole point. We're trying to build bridges, and it's politics. What I've learned from doing this podcast, it's all about coalition building.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. So, and we've got to start to reach across the aisle to do, and, we just got to, everybody love everybody. I got one more question, and this is super simple. Is there anything that the mayor can do to help create jobs?
Oh, great question. There are a lot of things the mayor can do to help create jobs. None of them are like immediately direct in terms of, initiating a community.
Like if they were bringing in like an Amazon or something like that, maybe you might be in those conversations.
Well, and so, what I was going to say is that the mayor has like a critical role to play in terms of being that champion for our community. And I absolutely, feel that responsibility in thinking about folks here who are hopeful for more opportunity in the future and can see the potential. And also, thinking that, bigger picture, we want to continue to be a community that, other folks are looking to and saying like, Eugene, amazing. Yeah. Let's invest, our resources there, build our company there, or, initiate this, startup or whatever it might be there. And the mayor can play a really helpful role in that. There are also things that relate to, the environment in a place that are conducive to economic development and job creation. And some of that comes back to really basic things like, is there housing available that people can afford while earning wages that company can afford to pay? If it's a living wage, can you afford housing with a living wage in this community, right? Like, do those things still line up? And so the mayor has a lot of responsibility, I think, to help support that understanding of the integration of these concerns, right, and issues. A lot around like how we make sure that our public spaces are serving the community's needs in the ways that we need them to, right? That like our parks and trails and, open spaces continue to be places that people feel like these are amazing resources and amenities and are part of what makes living within this community so great. Those are both two like specific examples where, as mayor, I would be working to strengthen our capacity and build the strength of those two touch points that are naturally going to support economic development.
Right.
Because it's really about the quality of life in a place. And if that quality of life is affordable, and that's what we've got to work on.
And I think it's important for business in a community the size of ours, for it to make it more reasonable for businesses to start, for smaller businesses, for there to be some type of programs that basically are like, maybe zero taxes for city taxes for the first year or something like, just different things. And it's hard because they're investments, but if those businesses thrive, create employees, those people pay taxes, it ends up being more money, and so that's where, like I said, I'm kind of looking at things a little differently, because we can't just keep throwing money at everything. Other people, I saw there's 2 bumper stickers, and then we're going to get out of here, that I think are both interesting. We can work on. I remember seeing one about Bush, and it said Bush's human rights policy begins at conception and ends at birth. And then it said, what is Obama going to do when he runs out of other people's money? And I'm like, well, I mean, the thing is that it's not just the Democrats that are spending money like that. It's everybody. It's in politics. You know what I'm saying? And in a local government, you have to balance your budget. In the federal government, you don't. And it's so it's funny because the Republicans cry foul and they point out all these, red state stuff, but they're getting the more, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of my frustrations stem from money and politics and all that kind of stuff. And how it's just, I don't know, we could be here for days. Anyway, it's where's
locally, hopefully we can have some small amount of antidote to that. Like locally, like grassroots engagement and support of campaigns. It does mean a lot to me that there is this group of almost 200 people who have, said, absolutely, I endorse your campaign, and I'm, working in our community every day, and I'm connected to this work, and I believe in your ability to help us and lead in ways that will feel like everyone is a part of this. And that is like, we got to start there with all of this work.
Last thought I had was when you were talking about, I don't remember how it came up in my mind. It popped in, but basically the best moments for people, but especially Americans, is times of crisis. Unfortunately, is when people really come together. Is when they come together. And we saw it really big with the Holiday Farms fire. We saw really good leadership from Heather Buck, from Joe Berney, from, Peter DeFazio. And I like to put it in that order because I feel like that, and Joe would agree, and so would Peter, that Heather was phenomenal in this and stepped up. And people that, that disagree with her, whatever, it didn't matter. And so we find ourselves in a position where we're living in crisis, though. We don't need the next fire for people. The homeless situation is an epidemic. We've got school violence that is an epidemic. We have a lot, we've got addiction. We've got death by addiction that is basically murder, from these drug dealers selling fentanyl. And so we're living in crisis. And it's in you were talking about Eugene, that it was different. We have these set of issues, but now they're becoming national issues. And I think it's true because Eugene, it's tough because the counterculture is the culture, or was. It's faded. We don't even have time to be Eugene culture anymore. It's hard to tell, what's grunge, what's whatever, but I've lived here for 30 years. I've seen a shift. I've seen a change from this happy-go-lucky libertarianism where it was like hippies and rednecks and they somehow got along, the damn the man kind of thing. Now you've got this that's a national issue too, but now you've got this Eugene where it's just there's the haves and have-nots, and it's gentrification, and that's where we're heading.
And we also, I mean, again, this gets back to like why these policy conversations that are going to, center how we move forward together as a community, how we think about, future generations, how we think about the equity of opportunity that's local, that's real in people's lives right now. Like that sense of, our best days being behind us. Like, I just don't believe in that.
Sure. No, I don't either.
And so that sense of like, so how do we do what's needed now as a community in order to actually make progress? And part of it is, again, like focusing on like, where do we agree, and not like, get high centered on the points of disagreement or the fine grain, right? But just like focusing on the points of agreement so that we can move as a community and see ourselves as a community that does things, right? And that is making progress. And you asked about like connection to running. And I joke with, longtime friends, who also love running, that people talk about athletics and an experience with sport and think that it has to do with like physical accomplishments. It's really about how you view the world. And it's really about how you think about what it takes in order to realize something that's different from where you are now, the willingness to be consistent, to feel, your biology evolve due to stress, right? To stresses that you're intentionally putting on your body to become capable of doing that new thing. Like there's a version of that is also very healthy, right? So I think of that relative to the work we have ahead. And I think, okay, so we've just got to like realize that we are building and working towards a future that is going to be challenging, but we are capable of managing the challenge, right? We're not trying to do, something that's going to explode all of our social capital. We're trying to actually strengthen ourselves with each step in this process, and, incrementally over time. And sometimes that's going to feel like it's really fast. And sometimes, it's going to take years, but actually like move forward. And that, like, I think it's a really interesting thing right now in the sense that there's a lot of talking, right, about how bad these circumstances are. And then when you say to people like, but what do you think we should do? Right? Or how do you want to see us rising to this occasion? What would you like to see different? You realize that people are rarely being asked that question right now, right? And that they also haven't had a lot of time or community space to wonder and debate it, right? It's, it's kind of like, I mean, jokingly, going back to your Taylor Swift, like person of the year, who would you choose? If you had to choose one, who would you choose?
We just need to let each other be wrong sometimes. And,
or be learning, right?
Yeah,
like be learning and growing.
That we don't have to know right this second. And I'm telling myself that as much as anybody else, that it's okay. I post crap like that because I want people to understand that it's okay for you to brainstorm publicly.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, but
well, and local government is different from that, right? Like we have very high expectations of, what it looks like when policy is in action. And there's a lot of people, this is why I bothered to say that earlier about like, there are professionals who are working on these issues every day, and we probably don't see a lot of their work.
Yeah,
because it's pretty
city managers, and I mean, people don't. It's not like you're just going to get up there and you're going to burn it all down in one day. There's a lot of smart people that are actually working at the city that are doing these things that will work hand in hand with you, and that, like,
And a lot of times, I think watching the decision making from city council to giving the city manager direction to do something, and then the city manager directing staff to do something, right? That also reveals the cycle of change, right? Because why is the city council giving that direction? It's because the community has said, we want you to move in this direction, and we're sure about it.
Right.
I think where we run into problems is like not being clear about where we're trying to go. And, I would bet that the, staff at City of Springfield, City of Eugene, many places around the country, they're just thinking, man, I wish our community could get to a point of agreement about what they want to do, because we can do it. If we decide where we'd like to head, then we can tell folks, well, here's what we're going to need in terms of resources, or here's your policy options, or here's how we would deploy the policy that you directed us to develop. Like that, that comes back to us as community members. And it also comes back to the importance of, the role of a mayor in building those bridges and connecting people to that vision, and then kind of, getting down to brass tacks when we need to, like, how should we actually do this? But also like that question in service of a shared understanding of where we're trying to go. Like that work, I mean, that is real work in community that, has to happen every day in order for anywhere to accomplish new things. And I think what we're really clear right now about is that, there's lots of, encouragement and enthusiasm for this new chapter. And doing new things is not effortless, right? Yep. Like it's going to take energy.
Yeah, no, that all sounds really good. And I like that you never once use the metaphor skin in the game. I hate when politicians say they got skin in the game. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. Anyway, where can they find I don't know. They say we need to find people that are going to roll up their sleeves, people that got skin in the game. I'm like, dude, that doesn't mean anything. But
I heard a phrase the other day that I actually really loved. And it was on a podcast I was listening to, and the conversation that some folks were having about how we meet the climate crisis, and the term was muscular hope. And I was like, okay, that resonates with me. I feel that deeply. That speaks to who I am as a person.
I get it. I feel it. I heard two things, and then we'll leave. One thing is in the barbershop, and I thought of a slogan because I got a 10-year plan, but you can laugh, you can cry, but you can't move your head. That's my slogan for my barbershop, so you can do whatever you want. You can laugh, you can cry, but you can't move your head. And then the other one, what was it that I don't know. We got to get out of here anyway. So where can they find you? You said it before, but what's the website for people to donate if they'd like to donate to your campaign?
Oh, thank you. So KaarinForMayor.com, and my first name Kaarin is Kaarin. You can find us there. You can find us on social media at Kaarin for Mayor. Hopefully again in the future, you'll find me back on this podcast.
Yeah.
And would love to have people feel connected to this campain. Certainly your support, endorsement, but
no,
also
it's huge. It's huge. And I will be critical. Me and Thomas will still talk smack, because that's what we do. And it's so much fun. And I appreciate having, the access and to reach out and be like, hey, would you be interested in doing this? Everybody says yes. It's been a really cool thing. I'm just a dude. And to have these conversations, I mean, it's been a treat. So Kaarin Knudsen, thank you so much. We're going to get out of here. That was good.
Oh my goodness.
That was long.